Welcome to the rebeljesus.net, the struggle for religious freedom in prophecy. In this video, which will be around an hour or so, I will outline the article in the rebeljesus.net called The Struggle for Religious Freedom in Prophecy. So please have a read of that or open it and read along as I'm going through this. There's a lot of information and some of it will go by very quickly. So please feel free to pause the slides, go back and read the article on that section, and then return to the presentation. This first quotation is from Walter Brueggemann in The Prophetic Imagination. Something new happened in history with Exodus and the Moses movement. On the one hand, Moses intended the dismantling of the oppressive empire of Pharaoh. On the other hand, he intended the formation of a new community focused on the religion of God's freedom and politics of justice and compassion. The dismantling begins in the groans and complaints of his people. The energizing for this movement begins in the doxologies of the new community, that is, the praise of Yahweh by that community and asking him to lead them to freedom. But the Moses movement is too radical for Israel. Therefore, soon there's an attempt to counter the new history of energy. The old history of Pharaoh is continued in the monarchy of Israel. The monarchy, with its interest in self-securing, is effective in silencing the criticism and denying the energizing. But the kings never seem to be able to silence the prophets for long. The prophets of Israel continue the radical movement of Moses in the face of royal reality. Jesus of Nazareth practiced in most radical form the main elements of prophetic ministry and imagination. He practiced the dismantling in his crucifixion, and the energizing was fully manifested in his resurrection, in which he embodied the new future given by God, that is the kingdom of God. So what Walter Brueggemann is saying here is that the purpose of prophecy is to unmask the powers that currently dominate us in this world and to provide a vision and the energy to pursue the new world, non-violently, of course, as Christians. We're going to look at the beasts in Revelation and the beasts in Daniel and connect them together. And we're going to propose solutions for the 1260, 1290, 1335, 2300, and 7 times prophecies. We'll be assuming that historicism is the correct paradigm. Okay? So not preterism or futurism. Preterism is all prophecy was fulfilled in 70 AD. And futurism means that most of it is still to be fulfilled. So we're taking the historicist approach, which is prophecy unfolds over time, from the time it was given down to our time. We're going to assume the day for a year principle is correct. Okay, and you can see William Shee's discussion in Selected Studies on Prophetic Interpretation, pages 67 to 110. For the argument that the day for a year principle is correct. If you Google that, you should be able to find Shia's Selected Studies on Prophetic Interpretation. Another assumption is all countries are beasts. There are no godly countries or special case countries today. So we don't consider, say, the United States as being the Christian power, the light to the world, which it claims for itself. We look at the behavior of the beasts and not what the beasts say about itself. So there are no special case holy countries today. All countries are beasts in opposition to God's kingdom. And we will not calculate when Jesus will return. That's been tried by many people and all of them have failed. And since Jesus said only the Father knows the time of the end, he doesn't even know, then it would be foolish for us to try to predict that. But that doesn't stop people from trying. Here's the disclaimer. Bible prophecy is complex and, as Sir Isaac Newton noted, generally not well understood until fulfillment. So what I'm giving you is speculative based on decades of study of history and study of prophecy. But I'm not saying that this is inspired or it's the correct one, but I think it is pretty good. So you'll have to decide for yourself. All errors are mine. All errors are mine, all right? Okay. Freedom of conscience is not the same as religious freedom. Okay, so authentic Christianity requires freedom of thought. Christians must be able to decide for themselves. They must not be coerced by the state or by religious leaders, threatening them to believe certain things or else. This is what happened with the Catholic Church throughout much of the Middle Ages and Dark Ages, so-called. They forced people to believe certain things on pain of being declared a heretic and tortured and killed. So, no, that doesn't cut it. Christians have to have the freedom to think for themselves, to understand what they think the Scripture means, and to pursue worship of God according to their own conscience, not the conscience of someone else. And from Constantine until the French Revolution, most state church unions controlled believers and punished those that resisted. So Catholics, state Protestant churches, and even American religious colonists in the early years of America all persecuted those that did not obey them. So when we see a persecuting church, we know that it's not a church from Christ. So prior to Constantine, there was a variety of beliefs and practices, and Christians were nonviolent. They did not fight Caesar's wars. Intermittent persecution from Jews and Rome was normal, mostly after the first century. And they started moving towards one bishop per city. And then finally the Bishop of Rome became the bishop over all the other bishops. And they quickly lost the perspective of the Hebrew Scriptures. And so they lost that whole perspective that's so key to understanding Jesus and his ministry and his teachings. Christians prior to Constantine were known for kindness and caring for the community, including non-Christians. But in 312 CE, Constantine becomes emperor. He says this cross in the sky, and he hears a voice say, "In this sign go conquer." Now that's not likely to be from Jesus, who's the Prince of Peace and who taught his followers to turn the other cheek, put down the sword, do not return evil for evil, love your enemies. So this was clearly not from Christ, but this is what he claimed. Saw a cross in the sky, and he beat his rival and became, through this civil war, he became emperor of Rome. In 313, he promulgates the Edict of Milan. And what that did is it stopped the persecution, gave the churches money, and allowed them to preach the gospel anywhere in the kingdom, in the empire of Rome. However, they were beholden to Constantine, and they must not cross him. That was understood. And this, of course, is blasphemous because a Roman emperor who is a murderer and was a sun worshiper has no place in the Church of Christ. But here he is, deciding that he's going to be head of the church, and the church went for it, and they became corrupted. The Donatist controversy really illustrates this because in 314 CE there was a council called, which was chaired by, of course, Constantine. The Donatists said Christians that had failed in persecution, who had given up their faith under threats of violence, should not be church leaders because they had failed this fundamental test. Constantine said, no, they're fine, they can be church leaders. So Constantine didn't even care that these folks didn't have the qualities of Christian leadership. So it becomes clear that Constantine was just using Christianity in order to solidify his empire. He didn't really care too much about what the beliefs were and what the different controversies were. In 325, he calls the Council of Nicaea to settle the conflict between the Arians on one hand and the Athanasians on the other. The Arians did not like the Trinity doctrine, and the Athanasians did, and there was this big conference, and Constantine adds unbiblical language to the Nicene Creed. And the Arians fall out of favor, and then they were persecuted. And it kind of went back and forth for a while, but in the end, the Arians completely lost out. So Constantine was vain, narcissistic, ruthless, a sun worshiper. So really, he had no business being leader of the church, yet the Christians all bowed down to him. And that's what corrupted the church for centuries afterwards. In Haley's handbook, the 65 edition, he states, historians estimate that in the Middle Ages and early Reformation era, more than 50 million martyrs perished. Now, I don't know if that number is actually correct or maybe an exaggeration, but in any event, there was many, many people that were persecuted for not bowing down to the church's authority. Roman Catholicism was the worst. We think of the Spanish Inquisition. But state Protestant churches also persecuted. We have Calvin burning Michael Servetus for heresy. We have Zwingli siding with the state on the heresy of adult baptism, if you can believe it, and his students were burned and drowned. We have the Church of England persecuting and burning Christians. And we have Massachusetts colony Puritans persecuting Roger Williams and others. He had to run for his life, sick and in the middle of winter. So the idea that Christians came to the United States to avoid persecution is not really correct. It may be correct that they avoided persecution in some cases, but when they came here, they became persecutors, many of them. And so there we see the persecuting church is not from Christ. And the persecution slows in the 17th century and ends with the French Revolution, because in the French Revolution, the state of France basically declared the Roman Catholic Church as no part of the government. They pushed them out and said, we're not going to be pushed around by any church leaders anymore. You guys stick to prayer and Bible reading and good works, and we'll manage the state. Thank you very much. So that represented the end of Catholic power, because France was the key country that supported the papacy, and they said no more of this. The Polish Brethren, I'm not going to read all these slides, so please feel free to pause the slides and read them, read the details yourself. But the Polish Brethren and the Warsaw Convention, this was in January 28th of 1573, was one of the first acts granting religious freedoms in Europe. So the Warsaw Confederation guaranteed to uphold peace between the adherents of the divine confessions, making the newly formed Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth one of the most tolerant countries on the continent. Now, the Polish Brethren were the first country. Poland was the first country where you could go there if you had beliefs that would get you persecuted in other parts of Europe. You could go to Poland and you could be relatively free to worship there. And so this is a really key event in history, as we'll talk about later, 1573. And so keep that date in mind, because if you didn't agree with the Catholic Church or the state Protestant Church where you lived, you could be suspected of heresy, arrested, thrown in jail, tortured, imprisoned, all your belongings gone, taken away, your family sold into slavery. So it was a really, really big deal that people could move to Poland and have religious freedom there. Stuart absolutism is another key historical period that we need to look at, because it is prophetically significant. It's a period of 1603 to 1648. And this is the period where the Stuarts ruled in England. First, James Stuart, from where we get the King James Bible, and then his son Charles Stuart. And it was a 45-year period, 1603 to 1648, where these two kings said that they only reported to God, and that they were head of the church and head of the government, and anybody who did not bow to their authority was creating the sin of blasphemy against God and treason against the king. That's what he said. And this is the reference here in Daniel 11:36 to 37. Then the king will do as he pleases. Okay, that phrase, do as he pleases, it means that this king has reached superpowered status. There's 3 instances of this phrase in Daniel 11, and we'll talk about those. But in this case, the king will do as he pleases. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god and will speak monstrous things against the God of gods. And he will prosper until the indignation is finished, for that which is decreed will be done. He will show no regard for the gods of his fathers or for the desire of women. King James was homosexual. Nor will he show regard for any other god, for he will magnify himself above them all. And in King James' very words, if you do not obey the king, you are sinning against God's sovereignty. Okay, so he considers himself essentially God, which of course is a blasphemy and abomination. Now, Daniel 7 and Daniel 12 are related here. Okay, so in this section, I'm going to connect the beasts in Daniel to the beasts in Revelation. Now, this goes by again very quickly, so feel free to pause the presentation. Please look up the article, "The Struggle for Religious Freedom and Prophecy," in the rebeljesus.net website. That's my blog, and you'll find lots of information there. So in Daniel 7, we have these beasts, 4 beasts: lion, leopard, bear, and then this fearsome beast. And the last has 10 horns, sprouts a little horn that wears down the saints for a time, times, and half a time, but is judged and is destroyed. The kingdom is given to the Son of Man and the saints, that is his followers. So the 4th beast initially is imperial Rome. Okay, that's the beast that conquers Greece, but it's destroyed in the 5th century by northern Germanic tribes. Then the papacy arises. So the papacy would oppress for 1260 years, that's the 3.5 times, but will be neutered at the French Revolution, which we discussed earlier. Okay, the 10 horns refer to the northern tribes that conquered Rome. Later, they will be called the beasts from the abyss, okay, which is first France and then the EU. That's in Revelation 11. So in the Revelation 12 dragon beast with 7 heads and 10 horns is Rome. We know it's Rome because it persecutes the child Jesus, who is caught up to heaven. The number of heads on the 7 beasts: Babylon is 1, Medo-Persia is 1, Greece is 4, that gives us 6, and Rome is 1, that gives us 7. So there are 7 heads on Daniel 7 beasts. There are 7 heads on the Revelation 12 beasts. Okay, so Revelation 12 beasts is a composite of the Daniel 7 beasts, and it's always Rome. Okay, so Rome is the enemy of God. So we start off with imperial Rome crucifying and Jesus and persecuting Christians. We have Constantine who is the Roman emperor. Okay, in 312 he becomes emperor, and he subverts the church. He gets the church to bow down to him. Very, very sneaky. He didn't have to persecute them. He offered them money and churches, and he offered them freedom, offered them power, and they bowed down to him. So he subverts the church. Rome is destroyed by the Germanic tribes in the early 5th century, and the papacy arises out of that destruction and reigns over the kings of Europe for 1260 years until the French Revolution. So that is Rome. First imperial Rome, then the Roman papacy. So it's all Rome, but different configurations of Rome. The final Rome will be the lamb beast with 2 horns. That arises after the papacy is going down, and it's the final representation of Rome. And I believe that is the partnership of the United States and Great Britain. And we will discuss that in more detail. Okay, in Daniel 8, we have a ram with 2 horns, and it loses a battle to a male goat with 1 horn. That's Alexander the Great. The horn is broken. The four horns arise from his kingdom. That's Alexander's 4 generals. Now, out of one of them refers to one of the 4 winds, not the horns. So I would refer you again to that earlier document by William Shea. It cannot be Antiochus Epiphanes. Even though all the commentaries say it's Antiochus Epiphanes, and then they also say Antiochus Epiphanes is the king of the north for much of Daniel chapter 11. It cannot be. Rome arises from the west, conquers to the south, east, and beautiful land. Okay? It is Rome that suppresses the Tamid of free worship. Antiochus Epiphanes had little or no success going south. He doesn't come out of one of the four winds, right? He comes out of one of the four horns. And I really invite you to look up William Shia's article in the Journal of Prophetic Interpretation, which was referenced earlier, because his critique is just devastating. There's also a grammatical argument that he makes there. So out of Rome comes the papacy. The 2300 day years, okay, because it talks about this vision and this suppression of the Tamid. In Hebrew, Tamid means the pure open worship, for 2300 day years. This is from the creation of the Republic of Rome in 509 BCE until the Republic of France in 1792 CE. That's my own work. I haven't seen anybody else find that yet. And so in 509 BCE, Rome, it becomes a republic, and that is identified as the future enemy of God. When France becomes a republic in 1792 with its constitution, it ends the power of religious affiliated Rome. That's it. It's over. No more papacy is allowed to be in the government of France, and then other countries follow suit. Now, in Revelation 13, there's the sea beast first, verses 1 through 10, that comes out of the water. So, sea beast has feet of a bear, that's Medo-Persia, a leopard body, which is Greece, mouth of a lion, that's Babylon, and one head, which is imperial Rome, which received a death stroke and was healed. Okay, so the death stroke that was healed was when imperial Rome was destroyed by the Germanic tribes in the early 5th century. It was like Rome had died. But when the papacy arises from the ashes of Rome, it comes alive again. So this is how the head was healed. Daniel 8 has number of heads. So we have Medo-Persia 1, Greece 4, that's 5, imperial Rome 1, that's 6, and the papacy is 1, that's 7 heads in total. All right? So Babylon is now represented in the beast's mouth. So the Revelation 13 beast has 7 heads. Daniel chapter 8 has 7 heads. And you have to look at them together. The Revelation 13 beast is a conglomerate of Daniel 8. And notice that the lion is, it has a mouth of a lion now. Lion is Babylon. So now the beast, that is papal Rome, right, the papacy, speaks with the mouth of a lion. It speaks Babylon, as it were. Okay? So here is a diagram that I put together. I spent most of my adult life in software development, so I use we always use diagrams like this to try to clarify our designs and our concepts. So I hope this is helpful here. It's helpful for me, and I hope it's helpful for you. But what I've done is I've laid out the struggle for freedom of conscience and prophecy. Right? So it's a different approach to prophecy. A lot of the times in prophecy, they're looking for, interpreters are looking for things like doctrine. So when did the church start producing bad doctrine, which misled everybody and sort of ruined the church? That's one approach. And then they look at, say, perhaps 325 CE, the Nicene Creed, as being the first move towards unbiblical doctrine. But if we think about it, when Constantine sits down with the church and says, I'm your leader now, I will stop the persecution, I will give you money, you can go build your churches, but you must recognize my authority. The church has already become corrupted as soon as it bows down to Constantine. We don't have to wait for any doctrinal things to arise. The church is corrupted when it bows down to the royal emperor. Okay? So here we go. We'll just kind of go through this here. We over in the left top corner, we have 509 BCE. That's when Rome becomes a republic. 2,300 years later, the French Republic. Okay, and what's this diagram doing? It's showing us how events moved through history in order to finally get freedom of conscience, right? Where Christians could worship freely according to their God-given, biblically trained conscience. In 313, Constantine issues the Edict of Milan, stopping the persecution and making himself head of the church. Okay. In 555 CE, the papacy is reaffirmed by Justinian. Okay, so that's the Bishop of Rome becoming the head over the other bishops and the sort of sole dictator of the church after Imperial Rome is destroyed by the Germanic tribes. And as I said, 1260 years later, Napoleon is deposed. And why do we have Napoleon deposed here? Often interpreters will think this ends in 1798. But the problem there is that the papacy was reconstituted in 1809 under Pius VII, and then was deposed. And then what happened is Napoleon put the papacy underneath him, and he intended to create an authoritarian Europe with him as emperor and the Catholic Church under him. So we had to wait. The 1260 years has to wait until Napoleon is deposed by the French Parliament or government, and then that's the end of the Catholic Church's power there. Okay, if we add 1260 years of suppression, okay, so there's two 1260 year periods. I think there's one here, which is the career of the papacy, 1260 years from 555 up to 815 or so, 1815. There's another period of suppression of true worship, and this happens with Constantine in 313 with the Edict of Milan. Okay, and exactly 1260 years later, we get the, as we mentioned earlier, the Polish Brethren and freedom of worship there. So you could move there to Poland if you were being persecuted, and you could have you could worship freely there. There's also the 1290 years and the 1335 years that the angel mentions in chapter 12 of Daniel. If we take 313 as the beginning and add 1290 years, we get 1603, the exact year of the Stuart abomination, of Stuart absolutism, of the king declaring in a conference that he is head of the church and head of the state, and if you do not obey him, you're not obeying God. And his son Charles did the same thing. So this period, 1290 years, takes us to 1603 and the Stuart abomination. And then the angel says, for those who wait till the 1335 years, happy are those who wait till the 1335 years. Well, what happened in the 1335 years? That was the end of the Stuart abomination. King Charles was arrested, tried with treason, and executed in January of 1649. And that was the end. So for 45 years, the Stuart abomination went. Now, why is this important here? Because this is the land beast here with two horns. What happened here with Britain is going to happen with the United States as well. And that's why God gives us this prophecy here, so we'll understand what's going to happen to the United States in our time. So we have Stuart abomination. We have the mega Christian abomination under Trump in our time. Okay, it's the same thing. It's a Roman-like leader who claims to be sent by God to rule and bring his country back to greatness, and it's all a lie. It's all a lie. Now, something else happens at the end of these 1335 years. Okay, and go have a look at Daniel. Pause the video. Go have a read of Daniel chapter 12, just to refresh your memory here. But at the end of this 1335 years, remember the angel in chapter 12 of Daniel says, "Happy is he who waits until the 1335 days," because it was the end of the Stuart abomination in England, and in Europe, it was the Treaty of Westphalia. So there was a 30-year war in Europe from 1618 to 1648. It was the most destructive war in Europe they'd ever seen. It was just a slaughter, and it was Catholics against Protestants. At the end of that 30 years, the rulers of these European states said, you know what, we've had enough of these Christians and their wars over doctrine, right? From now on, what the Treaty of Westphalia said is each king or queen will decide what church denomination is going to be in their country, and you could move to that country that most closely suited your beliefs. And so that's why the angel says, happy is he who waits for the 1335 years, because finally it wasn't perfect, but finally there was some relief from this ongoing persecution. And then in 1688 there was the Act of Toleration, okay, in England. And then finally in 1813 the Unitarian Relief Act, which allowed complete freedom of conscience. Around the same time that Napoleon was being deposed. Okay, and then over here in the United States, we have Roger Williams and William Penn founding Rhode Island and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and where they allowed freedom of worship. You could worship however you liked, as long as you weren't breaking the law and against somebody else, like abusing somebody else. Or you could worship not at all. You could be an atheist. That was fine. They felt that the government had no business in the religion of the people, right? So that was going on. And then we had 1791, right around the time of the French Republic, the U.S. Bill of Rights and the Constitution. And that guaranteed freedom of religion. Now we see religious leaders in the United States today trying to bring religion back into government and kind of force people to obey religious tenets. And so this is a very dangerous development. We really don't want religion involved in government. I want to be left alone to worship my God, to read my Bible, to associate with my friends as I please. I don't want the state telling me what I have to do religiously, right? It has no business in doing that. So this is a time when religion is trying to make a comeback in the governments of the West, well, especially the United States, but it's going to fail. It's not going to work. Okay? So what does the end look like? What does the end look like? We have on the left here, we have the famous statue, right? We have golden head Babylon, silver shoulders, which is Medo-Persia. We have the abdomen of bronze, which is Greece, and then the legs of iron, which is Roman Empire. And then the feet of iron mixed with clay. Feet of iron mixed with clay. So the feet of iron mixed with clay is our time. Because we've come all the way through these powers, all the way down through Rome, and now we're at the feet of iron and clay. So the question is, what do these things mean? Here's another vision of the future over here on the right. This is the harlot sitting on the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast is the political power. The harlot is false churches. She's drinking a cup, right, of the blood of the saints, because she's been responsible for the persecution of the saints. And then what's going to happen is these 10 horns are going to turn on her and completely destroy her, burn her with fire. The 10 horns are the political system, will turn on the harlot. Over here, with the statue, is a rock will be cut out of a mountain and thrown at the feet of the statue and totally pulverize it. The rock, Jesus the rock, Christ the rock, also the kingdom of God is coming, and these kingdoms are going to meet their end. Okay, so Daniel 2, these are the powers here. Revelation 17. The clay is people, especially God's people. Okay, so if you look at those references there, we'll see that clay is referred to in the Bible as people, God's people. A harlot is God's people corrupted in apostasy. Iron symbolizes Rome, so the clay is in an unclean relationship with iron. At the end time, false churches corruptly are partnering with Caesar. The most striking example for us in the West is the white evangelical mega church, which has prostituted itself to Donald Trump, their Messiah King. It's the same pattern we've seen in the past, exactly the same pattern, and it's going to have the same outcome. Destruction of the false Messiah and his false church. That's what's coming. Probably sooner than later. Now, in the Bible, we have this term called abomination of desolation, or abomination that brings desolation. The biblical definition of abomination refers to objects and practices which are an affront to God, such as idolatry, sexual misconduct, magic and divination, injustice and lying, and hypocritical worship. Matthew 24:15 says, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, then flee to the mountains. Okay. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize her desolation is near. That's Luke 21:20. Notice he says when you see the armies, that was the Roman armies who were surrounding Jerusalem, recognize that her desolation is near. The Roman armies were the desolator, not the abomination. They were the desolation. It's two parts. There's an abomination, which is an affront to God, which brings a desolation, armies that he sends. In the past, it was the Babylonians who were sent to destroy Jerusalem, or the Assyrians. In 70 CE, it was the Romans. In our time, it will also be governmental powers. Mark 13, when you see the abomination of desolation standing where it should not be. Okay, so that's another aspect of it. Okay, it's standing in the holy place. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, when the abomination is standing where it should not be, then you'll know that the desolation is soon. On the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until destruction is poured out on the one making desolate. Okay, that's Daniel 9:27. Okay, so the abomination was not the Roman armies. The Roman armies came as a result of the abomination. Also, Matthew 24, Luke 21, and Mark 13 were not completely fulfilled. If you go back and read those prophecies, you will see many details there that were not fulfilled yet. The resurrection has not happened. Jesus has not divided the sheep from the goats, and on and on and on. So what that tells us is these prophecies were partially fulfilled in the first century with the destruction of Jerusalem, and there'll be a greater fulfillment later. Prophecies are often written like that. Minor fulfillment to help us understand what the prophecy is trying to do, and then the major fulfillment. So when we see these things, we can lift up our heads knowing our deliverance is near, as Jesus told us. Okay, here's Daniel's 70-week prophecy. And this is from, again, William Shea, Daniel, a Reader's Guide. I strongly recommend you get that book if you don't have it. It's a really excellent book. 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city. This is all from Daniel chapter 9. Okay, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin. Okay, from the issuing of a decree to rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Okay, so the decree to rebuild Jerusalem came in 457, first decree of Artaxerxes. Okay, 7 weeks, which is 7 times 7 days, 49 days, and we take that in years, right? A day for a year. 49 years takes us to 48 BCE and the rebuilding of Jerusalem, okay? And then there will be 62 weeks, it says, which takes us to 27 CE. And what happens then? The baptism of Jesus happens in 27 CE, okay? After 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off. Okay, and the prince who is to come will destroy the city. So after he's cut off here, In 31 CE, this is when he is crucified, right? And then the Romans come in the year 70 and destroy the city. But then the Romans are destroyed by the Germanic tribes. So often God will do that. He'll use a nation to punish Israel and then punish that nation for being so violent against his people, right? The Messiah will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. In the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifices. So he keeps the covenant to Israel in effect until 34 CE. He keeps it in effect for 1 week, which is 27 CE from his baptism. 7 years later takes us to 34 CE. So that covenant with Israel, he keeps in effect. And he, in the middle of the week, he puts a stop to sacrifices. How so? Because his sacrifice once for all time, for all people, is far superior to all the other sacrifices. All the other animal sacrifices are now meaningless. Okay, so he puts a stop to them because the only way to get sin forgiven now is through his sacrifice. Animal sacrifices are not going to help you. All right. So in 34 CE, what happens there? This is the end of the 1 week of favor to Israel. What happens? Well, Stephen prosecutes Israel with a covenantal lawsuit, as it's called in Acts 7. He shows how God has done all these things for Israel and how Israel always refuses. They're stiff-necked, hard-headed people. They don't listen to God. And he executes this lawsuit against them that they violated the covenant. And who's up and watching? God the Father and Jesus Christ on the Father's right hand are looking down on this. And they stone him to death. And it's at that point that Israel is cast off permanently from God's purposes. They can always come back, of course, by accepting Jesus. As Paul says, it's much easier for natural olive to be grafted back on their own olive tree than for Gentiles who are wild olive to be grafted on. So they're and many Jews do come back to God through Jesus. But that's the only way they can come back. They have to accept Jesus Christ as Messiah. There is no other way. Now, this abomination of desolation, okay, the abomination was the temple itself. It had become an idol, and it was filled up with Jewish terrorists who had they were holed up in the temple. They had murdered Roman soldiers, and they had murdered their own fellow Jews who would not fight the Romans, and they were in even the Holy of Holies in the temple. These Jewish terrorists. So that was the abomination. The desolation is the Roman armies that were sent to destroy the city and burn the temple to the ground. Okay? So the abomination is not the Roman armies. The abomination were the Jewish terrorists in the even Holy of Holies of all places. A place only the high priest could go once a year. And only if he was properly prepared spiritually. Otherwise, he could die if he went in there. So they all went in there. And they were holed up in there. Another thing these Jewish terrorists did is they burned all the food supplies because they felt that if the food supplies were burned, their Jewish compatriots would fight more aggressively. Okay, but of course it didn't work, and the Romans came, and there was a massacre, and the temple was burned to the ground. But keep this in mind: the abomination is Jewish terrorists in the temple where they ought not to be, trying to overthrow the Roman government and establish their own government. So this is them here. This is a picture from Children in History, it's called. Jewish terrorists holed up in the temple, massacring. The Romans are not there. The Romans are outside the walls still. They haven't breached the walls yet. But inside the walls, the Jewish terrorists are killing their own people. And there's a big power struggle going on right in the very holy temple. So, the abomination of desolation, Jewish religious leadership was in an unclean relationship with the Roman government, using religion for profit and to suppress and control the people. They conspired to murder the Messiah and Stephen's covenantal lawsuit in Acts 7 passes the sentence. Israel is cast out of God's favor, and he now goes to the Gentiles. Okay, so in the Jewish revolt of 66 to 70, violent Jewish rebels attacked Roman soldiers, killed fellow Jews, burned food supplies, and were barricaded in the temple itself. This, I believe, was the abomination, standing where it ought not. Roman soldiers with pagan symbols on their flags were not the abomination Daniel spoke of. They were the desolation that comes on the wing of abominations. In other words, the desolation comes as a consequence of the abominations. So in Bible prophecy, abomination of desolation means God's people partnering corruptly with Caesar, which brings on God's judgment in the form of desolation. So keep that in mind, this definition of abomination of desolation in prophecy. Now, the Anglo-American partnership is something that's really important because this, I believe, is the land beast of Revelation 13:11 forward. So many U.S. officials and members of Congress view the United Kingdom as the United States' closest and most reliable ally. This perception stems from a combination of factors, including a sense of shared history, values, and culture, a large and mutually beneficial economic relationship, and extensive cooperation on foreign policy and security issues. So Anglo-America has been a very close partnership. Ever since the United States became an independent country. At first, as we recall, Britain colonized the east coast of the United States and expected the colonies to pay taxes to Britain. And then there was the Revolution, and America became its own country. Now, Edmund Burke, who is sort of a champion of British conservatism, he's the one that recommended that Britain forge a partnership with the United States and not try to subdue it after they lost the Revolutionary War. Not try to go back again and subdue the United States, but to form a partnership with it. And that's what happened. And at first, Britain was the more powerful ally, having an empire, a Roman-like empire, biggest that the world had ever seen. But after the Second World War, after the First World War, and especially after the Second World War, Britain declined as a power, and the United States rose as a power to become the dominant partner in that Anglo-American partnership. So this is important to understand. And the Revelation 13 land beast arises after Imperial Rome, okay, because Imperial Rome is in chapter 12. It's destroyed by Germanic tribes, and then papacy arises in chapter 13, 1 through 10. Papacy is going down at the French Revolution. As it's going down, 1792 is when the Roman Church has its power ended, its political power. And what arises? America, 1791, the Constitution, right? So you got Imperial Rome goes down, papacy starts rising, and this is Rome, okay? Then papacy is going down. What's rising? America and England, America and Britain, now representing Rome, as Revelation 13:11 forward says. It exercises all the authority of the previous beast, which was Rome. Okay, so the Lamb has two horns, speaks as a dragon, two powers in partnership, and it pretends to be Christian. It makes fire come down from heaven. It has superior air force, drone warfare. America has basically won the Second World War through superior air power. It's famous for bombing countries ever since. It has extensive attack drones flying all over the Middle East and North Africa, and murders anybody it wants whenever it feels like it. It makes an image to the beast, the papacy. This initially was the Church of England, okay? Because remember, it's Britain and America together. At first, Britain was the greater power, and when King Henry developed the church, created the Church of England, he did it to separate himself from the papacy, but it looked the same. Okay, you had priests in robes, you've got incense, you've got altars, you've got mumbling of prayers, and holy water, So you've got all the things that the Catholic Church looks like, but it was an English church, right? Because King Henry didn't want to be part of the papacy any longer. Of course, the Pope was not happy with that, but in time he had to accept it. You get persecuted for not recognizing the image in verse 15. So the Church of England persecuted many, many people. You can't buy or sell without the mark. Only the United States and Britain have the power to impose sanctions, crushing, crippling sanctions on any country it wishes. I mean, just when you're listening to news next time, when they're talking about sanctions, it's only the United States that can impose them because it controls the worldwide banking system at present. That's changing, but at present it controls the SWIFT system, which is used for international, very, very large international banking transactions, right? The 666 man comes from the land beast, not the sea beast. If you look at the 666 man, it's associated with the land beast. So it's not the papacy. It's associated with the land beast, which is Anglo-America. So 666 means sinfully corrupt and authoritarian, right? And pretending to be godlike. So King James is the first 666 man in the land beast, as I showed you on that chart, with James and Charles and their claims to have divine authority to rule, right? So he's the first 666 man, and he was homosexual and paraded around the palace with his young lovers, and was really quite a disgusting person. But there's another 666 man. He's long gone now. He died, and then his son Charles was executed for treason. But there's another 666 man in our time, and I believe that person is Donald J. Trump. He has all the aspects of the 666 man. He's exceedingly sinful. He's a accused sexual rapist. He's a liar. He's greedy. He manipulates and deceives people. He's power hungry, and he claims religious power for himself. I mean, they call him the anointed of God and so on, and he doesn't challenge any of these things. So he's really quite a disgusting, sinful person, and I believe he's the 666 man in our time. So this, I won't read all this, but this basically just, please pause and read this for yourself. I'm not going to read this whole slide, but this basically shows the history of Anglo-America in the Middle East. And at first it was Britain after the First World War, and then after the Second World War, it was the United States that were the dominant powers in the Middle East. And it's all about oil. It's all about oil and oil control. Now, is America promoting freedom and democracy? This is from William Blum, who's a respected conservative writer, and he documents all the countries whose governments the United States has tried to overthrow since World War II. So the United States has created all this misery since the Second World War. And we could add Pakistan. The United States has recently sent the CIA into Pakistan and got rid of their prime minister. They just got rid of him. They said, you're not in power anymore. And so, because Pakistan wouldn't do what the United States told it to do. So you won't see any of these stories in the news, really, generally. But this is the record of the United States since World War II, imposing misery on the rest of the world. Okay? That's why it's a lamb that speaks like a dragon. It pretends to have Christian values, but it really speaks as a dragon. It's really a satanically inspired entity. These are all the military bases that the United States has across the world. Nearly 800 military bases in more than 70 countries. So it's an imperial power, right? And it's the world ruler of our time. Although, as I said, this is changing. Other countries are not so happy to bow down to the United States anymore, it seems. So what else happens near the end? Daniel 11:40. At the end time, okay, so what else happens? The king of the north is Anglo-America, or west led by USA. Okay. The king of the north or west will collide with the king of the south. That's Muslim countries initially. But the North will win decisively, enter the beautiful land, that's Israel, and conquer and control other countries in the Middle East, and gain control of the valuable things of Egypt. This is describing Western powers led first by Britain, then America, in subjugating the Middle East in order to control its resources. But rumors from the East, that's China and Iran, and from the North, Russia, will disturb him, and he will go forth with great wrath to destroy and annihilate many. This is happening right now. The United States is running around the world and trying to pressure countries into following its rule. It does not want to give up its position as world ruler. It does not want a multipolar world where it has to sit down with China and Russia and India and South Africa and Brazil and negotiate anything. The United States wants to just order people to do things, and they want people to obey. Well, the rest of the world's not going along with that any longer. So that's why we have this war in Ukraine right now. It's a proxy war between the United States and Europe on one hand, and Russia and China on the other, and they're allies. It just so happens that Ukraine is caught in the middle, and it's going to come out of it very, very badly. Probably won't be a Ukrainian country left by the time they're done there. Rumors from the East, China and Iran, and from the North, Russia, will disturb him. He'll go forth great wrath. Okay, so what's happening? China, Iran, Russia, and South Africa, the BRICS countries, okay, Brazil, others, are talking about now about how they can unite to oppose the United States hegemony. So they're talking about having another global currency besides the US dollar. Saudi Arabia is talking about selling oil to China in Chinese money, which will cause the US dollar to tank. Right now, the United States insists that all countries buy oil with American dollars, which keeps the American dollar high value. When that changes, when you can buy oil in your own currency, the American dollar is going to tank because there isn't much of anything backing it up. The United States knows this. That's why it's very, very angry right now and issuing threats to Russia, China, and other countries. He will pitch the tents of his royal pavilion between the seas and the beautiful holy mountain, yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him. What does this mean? He will pitch the tents, his holy tents, between the seas. Okay, so we have Mediterranean, we have Dead Sea, and the holy mountain here, Mount Zion. What is that? It's Jerusalem. Okay? So the USA moved its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in 2018 under the Trump administration. He will pitch his royal tents of his pavilion between the seas and the holy mountain, but he will come all the way to his end, and there will be no helper for him. The holy tents, the royal tents, did I say holy tents? Royal tents of his pavilion were what, in the past, in Daniel's time, if a king wanted to go visit, or other high person wanted to go visit another country, he'd bring his entourage with him, and they pitch tents outside the city, and then they could meet there, right? The modern day equivalent of that is an embassy. Well, Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem against all the advice of everybody in the world, and did it anyways. But it says he will pitch the tents of his royal pavilion between the seas and the beautiful holy mountain, yet he will come to his end and no one will help him. So what this means is the United States and Britain are very near their end as world powers, unfortunately. Okay, so there's two 1,260-day periods, as I mentioned earlier. So in Daniel chapter 11, there was given me a measuring rod like a staff, and someone said, "Get up and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship in it. Leave out the court, which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it is being given to the nations. They will tread underfoot the holy city for 42 months. And I will grant authority to my two witnesses. They will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth." Okay? So there's no evil personality indicated. So this is suppression of pure worship by the nations. The courtyard. The courtyard is where everybody came in to worship, right? Well, they completely corrupted that. They turned these churches into state churches, and they're completely corrupted, right? It begins with Constantine's Edict of Milan in 313 CE, and extends to the formation of the Warsaw Confederation, which we mentioned earlier, was the first place, Poland, where you could go to worship freely, or not worship at all if you were an atheist. The two witnesses are the Old and New Testaments and God's people that are generated from them. So complete freedom at the French Revolution, that's the beast. There will be complete freedom at the French Revolution. Okay, and the beast from the abyss in this section of prophecy in chapter 11 is first France. It first emerges out of the abyss. Why out of the abyss? Because imperial Rome went down. Okay, it's in the abyss. Papacy arose. Imperial Rome still in the abyss. Okay, but papacy arises to take the place of Rome. Papacy goes down. Imperial Rome rises out of the abyss in the nation of France. So that's France now represents Imperial Rome. It's now not a Christian power. It's kept by its constitution. It's told the church to stay out of the government's business. Okay, and later it will become the EU, the 10 horns. The original idea of the 10 horns is the 10 powers of Europe that arise along with France. The second 1260-day period is the evil personality. Okay, so he sees another beast coming up out of the sea. Okay, and this is Revelation 13, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns were 10 diadems. On his heads were blasphemous names. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, remember, Greece, and his feet were like those of a bear, Medo-Persia, and his mouth were like the mouth of a lion, Babylon. It speaks Babylonian. And the dragon gave him his power and throne and great authority. Okay, I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and its fatal wound was healed. Imperial Rome, when it goes down, that's one head slain. Okay, papacy arises. Oh, the head's been healed, right? In the form of the papacy. The whole earth was amazed, followed after the beast. They worshiped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast and who is able to wage war with it? Okay. There was given him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months was given him. And he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. This is the papacy from its formation in the 6th century until the French Revolution. So there's two 1260-day periods. First, the suppression of pure worship starts with Constantine in 313 up until the Warsaw Confederation and freedom of worship in Poland, where finally you could go somewhere and have freedom to worship or to not worship if you were an atheist. The second period begins in the mid-6th century with the rise of the papacy and ends with the French Revolution and France writing the Catholic Church out of its constitution. So back to our diagram again here. Here we have the papacy established. Here, 1260 years later, we have Napoleon deposed and the end of the Catholic Church as a political power. It's still here. It still has power, influential power. You know, the Pope has influence over people and governments, but it doesn't have any absolute power. In the Middle Ages, the Pope could excommunicate a king, and the king would have to renounce his throne because nobody would listen to him if you were declared a heretic by the Pope. So is the Lamb beast in Daniel 11 and 12? Okay. There's a key phrase, as I mentioned here earlier, do as he pleases. This indicates that you've achieved superpower status, okay? So Daniel 11, 1-2 is Medo-Persia. 11:3, Greece will do as he pleases. Why? Alexander the Great becomes the superpower, the head of the superpower of the time. Okay, he has no competition. 11:4-13 is the Seleucids versus the Ptolemies. Those were two of Alexander's generals. That after Alexander had died, his empire was divided amongst his 4 generals, but the 2 dominant ones were the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. Okay, so this 11:4-13 talks about their rivalry. Okay, now in those times many will rise up. This is verse 14. Now in those times many will rise up against the king of the south, the violent ones among your people. Okay, this should be translated according to according to Daniel, a reader's guide, this should be translated robbers of your people, not the violent ones among your people. It should be translated robbers of your people. Okay? So in those times, many will rise up against the king of the south. Robbers of your people will also lift them up in order to fulfill the vision. So that's Rome. Okay? Many commentators want it to be violent ones among your people and want it to be the Jewish revolt that happened later with Masada and all that. But that's probably a mistranslation. It should be robbers of your people, which points to the Romans. They'll lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, right? Because they did conquer Jerusalem and they became the next world power, but they will fall down. Okay? This is all according to William Shea in Daniel, a reader's guide. They'll fall down. So they met their end. The Romans meet their end in the 5th century. So this is a summary of Roman rule. Okay, this verse 14 is a summary of Roman rule. And now the details, okay? But he who comes against him that is the king of the south, will do as he pleases. Again, that phrase, do as he pleases. What does that mean? He becomes a world power. Rome becomes the next world power after Greece. Greece was the Roman power, was the world power here. Now Rome becomes a world power. And no one will be able to withstand him. Okay? In his place, a despicable person will arise. Okay, that was Augustus in verse 20. So Augustus dies of natural causes. He's only emperor for a few years, and he dies of natural causes. And in place, a despicable person will arise. Now, most people will say that's Titus, but it doesn't really fit. It doesn't really fit. It says, on whom the honor of the kingship had not been conferred. Well, it actually had been, because Titus was adopted as a son by Augustus and was being groomed to be emperor. So he was next in line, and this was common amongst Roman emperors. They would adopt a son they felt was particularly talented, and they would groom him for the emperorship. That is, if they didn't have a natural born son that was a good candidate. And so what happened is Constantine comes in here. So I believe this is talking about the despicable person was Constantine. Often the prophecies in Daniel 11 will skip over individual rulers and go to the next one where there's a significant change of events. So Titus just continued on what Augustus had done, and there was several other emperors as well. But it's really Constantine where the big change happens. That's when it's through civil war. He conquers his enemies. The others that wanted to be emperor. He seizes the Roman emperor through civil war and violence, basically. And he had not been, the honor of the kingship had not been conferred on him. And he seizes the kingdom by intrigue, okay? Verse 11, 22 to 30 is the first and last crusades under the papacy. So notice what we're doing here. Daniel 11 is taking us down through history, hitting the key points with regard to these beasts in Daniel, so we can follow along the history all the way down to our time. So 11, 22 to 30 is the first and last crusades under the papacy. Now we're into 1300 and something. Okay. 1131, forces from him will arise and desecrate the sanctuary fortress and do away with the regular sacrifice, and they will set up the abomination of desolation. Okay. Forces from him will arise. Forces from who? Forces from the papacy will arise. Britain was originally Roman Catholic power, loyal to the Pope. Okay, so forces from him, from the Pope, that is Britain, will arise. Okay, desecrate the sanctuary fortress and do away with the regular sacrifice. And that's what King James and his son Charles did. They made themselves, like Constantine, head of the church. You must bow down to me. If you disobey me, you're disobeying God. This is the abomination of desolation in the Lamb Beast, first in Britain in the period 1603 to 1648. Okay? And so this is a summary of British rule. Okay? Daniel 11:36, again that phrase, he will do as he pleases. Why? third time that this phrase is used in Daniel 11. First time, it showed that Greece became the world power. Second time, shows that Rome becomes the world power. Third time, it's showing that Anglo-American is now the world power. So what this is telling us is the land beast in Revelation 13:11 forward is now in operation and is connected to here in Daniel chapter 11. Okay, so he'll do as he pleases, exalt, magnify himself. Okay, so Britain becomes the next world power, largest empire in history. He has shown no regard for the gods of his fathers or the desire of women. He was openly, flagrantly homosexual. He will take action against the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign god. A god in Scripture means a mighty one. Okay? So, Satan is called the god of this world. Why? Because he's good, because he's a mighty one. He's a mighty one that rules this world. So he's called God of this world. All right? There's only one God Almighty, and that's Yahweh, the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. But there are other gods mentioned in Scripture, right? So he will take, even humans are called gods in the Psalms. Jesus points this out to the Pharisees. So even humans can be called gods because why? They have great authority. If someone has great authority from God, then he can be considered a god in the sense of being a spiritual mighty one. Okay, not in any sense of having mystical powers or something, right? So this is where America enters the stage, and in partnership with Britain. Okay, so he will take action against the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign god. That's, I believe, the United States. And so Britain and America now become the world power. And there's no more world powers after this. There's no other powers that have this phrase, do as he pleases. We've reached the last one. There is no more. Okay? And then, so Anglo-America's, in verse 40 through 43, Anglo-America is shown to conquer the Middle East for oil. So first Britain in the first half of the 20th century, and then the United States in the second half. Rumors from the east and the north will disturb him. He will go forth with great wrath to destroy and annihilate many. Okay, that's what's happening right now. Right now. Russia, China, and Iran directly threaten Anglo-America's hegemony. He will pitch the tents of his royal pavilion between the seas and the beautiful holy mountain. He will come all the way to his end. USA moved its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in 2018. So that's where I think we are right now. And then in 12:1, at that time Michael, the great prince who stands guard over the sons of your people, will arise. There will be a time of distress such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. And at that time, everyone who is found written in the book will be rescued. Okay? I believe we're right at the beginning of that time now where Michael is standing up. We've already seen he will move his royal pavilion to between the seas and the holy mountain and come all the way to his end. That's 2018. It's now 2022, and I believe Michael is standing up, and we are about to see some of the worst things to happen to this planet since it was a planet with humans on it. Okay, so this is going to happen. It would be for a time, times and half a time. And as soon as they finish shattering the power of the holy people, all these things will be completed. So what is going to happen, I believe, is the political powers are going to turn against the false church. God is going to have the false church destroyed by the political powers as punishment because of their abominations. So, as we mentioned before, from 313, which is when Constantine issued his decree, if we add 1290 years, we get 1603. James I crowned. The abomination in England begins. 313 plus 1335 years. Happy is he who waits until the 1335 years. Charles I is in prison for treason, and it's the end of the abomination of Stuart absolutism. So Daniel outlines the career of the Stewart abomination in the Anglo-American power and foreshadows the American abomination, which is the one we're mostly concerned about because it's our time. The abomination of desolation standing where it ought not. Okay? In the years 66 to 70, here we see the Jewish terrorists holed up in the temple, slaughtering. They had slaughtered Romans and run into the temple to hide there, and they were slaughtering Jews who would not pick up arms against the Romans. And they burned the food supply to make everybody really desperate. Okay, that's an abomination standing where it ought not. They ought not to be there in the temple. They're an abomination. They were trying to overthrow the Roman government. Here, in the 17th century, we have Charles entering the Parliament to arrest 5 of the leaders that were opposed to him. They managed to get 4 out the back door, but 1 stayed. Charles was not successful. He is the abomination standing where he ought not. He ought not to have been in Parliament. He was not a member of Parliament. He tried to go in there and become a dictator and get everyone to bow down to him. It did not work. He was arrested for treason and he was executed instead. And what do we have down here? January 6th insurrection. We have the MAGAs following Trump, who they say is their anointed one, who is going to lead America back to greatness. They broke into the Capitol building. They disfigured it and did all kinds of damage, and they were trying to stop the counting of the electoral ballots so Donald Trump could stay in power. This is an abomination standing where it ought not, by definition. And what does an abomination do? It brings on a desolation. The desolation is going to come in the form of the state, the American government. We've seen a lot of prosecutions and so on and so forth right now, but it's going to get a whole lot worse for these people than it is right now. And Donald Trump's going to bear responsibility for what he's done here. So here, we have the whole picture here now. There's something we didn't discuss here. We have the 7 times of Daniel in Daniel, which is the famous tree prophecy. So you may recall that Daniel sees a tree, or the king Nebuchadnezzar sees a tree, but he forgot his dream. Daniel tells him what it was, and it's this tree that's chopped down, banded with a ring of iron and a ring of bronze for 7 times, and then the tree begins growing again after 7 times. So Daniel tells the king that he'll be crazy for 7 years, but he'll come back to his throne, and that's what happened. Nebuchadnezzar, because of his arrogance and ignoring that what God had done for him, he says, "I did all this." He's a narcissist, right? God strikes him with mental illness, and he's like an animal out in the field for 7 years, but miraculously he comes back into power. But there's a bigger, there's a much bigger picture to this, okay? 7 times is 7 times 360 days in a year, which is 2,520 years if we apply the day-year formula. Babylon falls in 539 BCE. 2,520 years later, 1982, Ronald Reagan goes to Britain for the first time in history, gives a speech to the British Parliament, outlining his vision for the future and so on and so forth. What this signifies is Babylon has arisen in the Anglo-American power under Reagan. Okay? In Daniel 5 and 25, there's this very interesting prophecy where the handwriting on the wall. Many, many tekel upharsin. Okay? Many means
This is this piece right down here. Okay? Many means God has numbered your days and brought it to the end. Tekel means your kingdom is going to be taken away from you. And Upharsin means it's going to be given to the Persians. Okay? But many is mentioned twice, which suggests to me there are two periods here where God has numbered your days. See, it says many. God has numbered your days, right? And found you wanting. There's many is mentioned twice here. Now, since there is a connection between Daniel and Revelation and the beast in Daniel with the beast in Revelation, if many is mentioned twice, there may be two periods here. Okay, so the first period would be the 45 years from 1603 to 1648. The second many, if we take that approach, would be the year Reagan was made president, in 1981. If we add 45 years to that, that means by 2026 we're going to see the end of the American Babylon. So the American Babylon is the white evangelical church, the disgusting king leader in Donald Trump, and so on and so forth. But it's also the country as a whole, which has done so much damage to the world. So it may mean that in 2026 or so that we're going to see the end of the American abomination, the American Babylon. Now this is very speculative, so I wouldn't put too much money on that, but it is something of interest. All right. So what is left to be fulfilled here? Okay, we've gone through all these boxes here. Okay, what's left to be fulfilled? Oh, sorry. In 1993, we see the rise of the European Union, right? So initially the European was the 10 horns. Now that may be extended to all the sort of major powers on the earth as we're in our time now. But initially it would have been the European Union. So the 10 horns are going to destroy the harlot. So that means the political powers are going to turn on the harlot and to completely destroy and burn her with fire. Okay? The beast and the false prophet are destroyed. Well, the beast is the political power, which is the 10-horn beast, okay, which is Rome in some form, and including the EU, which is originally was 10 constituent powers. The false prophet, if you look carefully at that scripture, does all the things that the lamb beast does in Revelation 13:11 forward. It's now called the false prophet. Not sure why. It might be because of the religious significance. The religious aspect of the Anglo-America will be destroyed, and that's why it's called a false prophet here. But if you look, the false prophet does all the same things that the two-horned lamb beast does in Revelation chapter 13:11 and forward. So that's very interesting. So it's either the political system, the Western political system, and the Western false religious system is going to be destroyed. Or it may have a slightly other meaning. I'm not 100% sure yet. Satan is going to be imprisoned for 1,000 years. That's in Revelation 21:3. Also up here, there's a cry of peace and security. 1 Thessalonians 5:3. Okay, there's this cry of peace and security. Then sudden destruction is instantly upon them, as the pangs of distress upon a pregnant woman. Okay, and we know that when that happens, there's no stopping it. If the contractions keep coming quicker and harder until the baby is born, right? So we'll be looking for that. We'll be looking for destruction of this harlot, this false church system. And then, unfortunately for us that live in the West, it looks like we're going to get whacked here as punishment. Satan's in prison for 1,000 years, and then the 1,000-year kingdom of God under Christ Jesus begins. Okay, so that's kind of what's left in the prophetic stream of time. I'm not going to go into Joel's prophecy, but if you look on the website, therebeljesus.net, and look for Joel's prophecy article, you can read up on this. But I'll just go through it very quickly here. Is verses 8 to 20 talk about climate change out of control. Animals are in distress and fields are burning and so on. And then there's a call to repentance and prayer. God answers, the earth is healed. And then there's God's final war against his enemies and those who abuse his people. Okay? So that's coming. There's also something else in Joel which you'll see referred to as Yahweh's army. And what I believe that is a people's revolution, a people's uprising, a secular people's uprising is going to rise and take charge of the political powers and then exact punishment on billionaires in oil companies that have ruined the earth, and on false religious systems that have corrupted people, and like the white evangelical church in the United States, the so-called mega Christians. So that's all coming. You can read that in Joel and read along in my article that I've written for that. So that takes us to the end of this presentation. I know it's long, but I wanted to put it all together in one presentation. I will be doing more videos that take this overall scheme and sort of break it down into chunks, and we'll do those so people can drill down and get more information. But please read along in the detailed description in the rebeljesus.net article, The Struggle for Religious Freedom and Prophecy. And keep working at it, and study the history that's behind these things. Because if you don't know the history, you're not going to know how prophecy is fulfilled, right? And like this video, subscribe, and we will talk to you soon. In the meantime, God bless you and yours, and may God lead us all to a better understanding of his prophecies and correct us where we're wrong and help us to be ready for the return of Christ. God bless you.